for the last 32 years has been in some way, shape, or form dealing with family violence, the great majority of my career. So I'm all about the nonviolence, but I think I can confidently say that I speak on everyone's behalf when I say this, because for sure we are definitely in a situation where, gosh, we need Texas we just want it to all go away. So thank God it is, and hopefully it'll stay away for sure. I've been at OCA now like for about 9 years. And so we've been busy doing all kinds of things since I started after doing prosecution. But one of the things that we talk about, or at least I talk about, is all about the all kind of stuff, but the reporting of protective orders and how we need to get them into the systems that are available. And also we have a new protective order registry. So we're going to talk about some of those things as well. And just let me know whenever. I do want to see the one poll question that I sent up. Can we go ahead and do that one real quick?
Yes. I have to add it because it was on the wrong one.
Oh, that's right.
So
sorry.
It's okay. Here we go.
All righty, cool.
All right. Save and let's launch the question.
All right.
Here we go. Polls. Launch polling. Here we go.
Perfect.
Do any of you attendees, it's all butchered. Do you assist protective order applicants with their paperwork? And as I told Kim, she asked how many of you guys maybe work in this area, and I said probably not everyone, but we all know somebody who's been affected by domestic violence, and this is definitely information that we can all use and share. We'll just let it keep going. It's going to keep going for a little bit, 30 more seconds, but it looks like most people don't, but they might, some might in the future. And all right, I think that's it. So it looks like only 3 people have done this so far that are here today.
Okay. And that is certainly something, I wasn't sure exactly how that would work, but it is a situation where if you are in a position that you can assist, even if that's not what you do right now, maybe you can share some of this information with the folks in your offices that do this work as far as helping with the paperwork, because that is a big factor in making sure that the applicants for protective orders are survivors of domestic violence and other violence are able to get the help that they need and understand the importance of certain information and why it needs to be accurate. So that's good. We're going to spend a chunk of our time on that. I also included one of the documents that you will be getting is a resource list, and it's a bunch of resources about a bunch of other things that I talk about whenever I train, because I train cops, lawyers, judges, basically anybody who's crazy enough to invite me to come talk to you. I do a lot on domestic violence dynamics, domestic violence and how domestic violence history of someone can affect mass shootings, can bring about mass shootings, all of those different types of things. So if there are things in there that I think are interesting that might be useful to look at. So please take a gander at those when you have a minute. But we are going to be very specific about the reporting here in Texas on family violence. First of all, I always talk about the Honoring Texas Victims. This is a report that is done by Texas Council on Family Violence every year. They've been doing it for probably about 30 years by now. And in 2019, we had 185 Texans that were killed by an intimate partner. And that number actually went down. It was more the year before in 2018, but we had 150 women that were killed by male intimate partners. We had 31 men and 4 LGBTQ partners that were killed by their intimate partners as well. And so it always becomes an issue as far as what we think about. And people have different ideas about domestic violence, family violence, and I get that, and those of us that work in the field are no different. But there are a few things to kind of keep in mind that, even our very relatively minor, we think of as minor incidents, low level injury, threats, those kinds of things. While thank God not every single one of those winds up as a domestic violence homicide, I will guarantee you that every single domestic violence homicide at some point started out as something very, very minor, a push, a grab, a slap. And of course, we also know that a bunch of the things that happen in before that are definitely precipitates the violence, and that's all these things on the power and control wheel. A bunch of behaviors that aren't necessarily criminal, but are certainly things that contribute and make it so that it's hard for victims to be able to get the help that they need. And so the weird thing about this is that in 2020, of course, COVID-19, domestic violence basically also became the shadow pandemic, going along with COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders that have gone along with that. As long as I've been doing this work, it never ceases to amaze me how abusers can weaponize tragedy du jour for their own purposes, and COVID-19 has been no different. Same thing happened with big, natural disasters like Hurricane Harvey. All of those things, like, oh, you can't go out there because this, that, or the other. For this is that, oh, you might catch the virus. Oh, you might bring it home. Oh, you better not go out there because I'm going to tell people that you're out in the world and bringing the virus home to your children, and that way they can take your kids away. I mean, the stories are endless. What we have been hearing about this stuff. And so it makes it really kind of crazy and scary that we have then survivors who are afraid to access systems, to try and get information, to try and get the help that they need. And so a lot of calls for assistance went down, but we are seeing certain numbers go up. And I am going to bet that this is not at all different in pretty much any jurisdiction. Just as an example, in 2018, I live in Bexar County, by the way. I work for the folks in Austin at OCA, but I live in Bexar County. So I live in San Antonio. And we had 17 homicides that were related in some way to a domestic violence incident, whether it was the intimate partner, whether it was a family member, law enforcement, something like that. We had 17 of those in 2018. 2019, we had 21. But then in 2020, just from January through August, we already had 32. And again, I've talked to people all over the state, especially for the last 9 years, but especially this last year as we were working on this protective order registry that we just started in October. And even very small rural jurisdictions that don't normally get a whole lot of stuff have talked about things like, magistrates' orders of emergency protection, that they would go months and months without even having one. And then, but during this time, they've had at least one or two every week. And it's been kind of shocking. And so I believe that the reporting of these incidents is going to be that much more important as time goes on. So we know that family violence is knowable, predictable, and preventable. And so we have situations where, just the fact that we know that something has happened. Oh, where's my thing? There we go. We know that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And of course, that was my mantra as a prosecutor. But just in general, what we know about domestic violence, not only does it tend to continue, it tends to escalate. And that is certainly the basic premises of protective orders and how they should be used in our state and in every state. So one of the big parts of that is protective order reporting. And while I know that those of you who may assist, or you have cases in your office or wherever you work, that you're dealing with protective orders that are part of other cases, that part of maybe potentially family law cases, custody cases, divorce cases. But protective order reporting is something that must occur. And it happens from what the clerk paperwork that the clerk sends from the court over to law enforcement to get stuff in the to get it into the TCIC, and that's been the standard, and that is still the standard. That still all has to continue. It's really, really important, and we're going to talk about why here in a minute. But then we have a new process that is a parallel process, which we just started in October of this past year. So one of the big things about protective order reporting is of course full faith and credit. We want for our protective orders from Texas to be enforceable in other states. And we want to be able to also enforce protective orders from other states within Texas, because that's the whole bit under full faith and credit, under the Violence Against Women Act and everything else. That protective orders, if you have one in one state, you shouldn't be able to cross state lines and then, oh, you don't have that protection anymore. So that was basically the whole beginning of this with Texas, with the Texas Crime Information Center. So of course, if you're from Texas, this is what your map looks like. I was born and raised in Texas. And so of course our Texas map is like, hey, it's all about us. But we do have to kind of keep in mind that, of course, what happens outside of Texas is super important. But within Texas, we are so big and so many counties and so spread out that we almost have to treat what happens from one county to the next almost the same way for full faith and credit between the states as well. So we have two types of reporting. One is to the Texas Crime Information Center, and the other one is through our new Protective Order Registry, and they're both mandatory by statute. First of all, the Texas Crime Information Center is basically accessed through the Texas Law Enforcement Telecommunication System, TLETS. And that is the system where, if you get pulled over, the cop pulls you over, can check for warrants and stolen property. And they're also checking to see if there are any active protective orders involving you. And of course, done for investigation purposes, but also, just like I said, kind of on the side of the road when law enforcement is contacting people. So what happens after a protective order is issued, the protective order is then forwarded to that agency, where the folks in that agency, usually it's like dispatch personnel, manually enters information into various fields into this TLET system, which feeds up into the Texas Crime Information Center. So they can check that system, see if they have any kind of protective order, see what those terms of that order might be, prohibited locations, whether a firearm is prohibited, the protected parties, any of that stuff. But only law enforcement can enter the data into that system, and only law enforcement can directly access that data, with some very, very, very minor exceptions. But what happens is once it goes into TCIC, it actually feeds up into the national version of that, which is the National Crime Information Center. And so that's how we know if, like, let's say I have a protective order here in Texas, but then somebody in Oklahoma or California can run it and should get a hit back through their system because it's also in NCIC. The other place that it feeds up into is what is called NICS, and that is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. The National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is why I'm going to say NICS from now on. NICS is the place where, according to the Brady Act, it's Title 18, Section 922, where it is a computerized system that provides information on whether someone should be allowed to possess a firearm. So this is the system that licensed firearms dealers have to check to see, is this person prohibited from having a firearm or not? And so they search through all kinds of systems. They search criminal records, mental health records, protective order records, and other types of records. And so sometimes also what happens is that the feds will make follow-up requests to the police or prosecutors or courts for other information, because there are some very specific things, like certain types of criminal offenses, misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. When I was prosecuting, every now and then I would get a call from the feds saying, hey, we see that there's a family violence case. Who is this case involving? It's a conviction. Well, it's a conviction involving an intimate partner. Then yes, we want to make sure that we tag them in the system as being someone who is prohibited from having a firearm. And so, but for protective orders, someone is prohibited from having a firearm under the Brady Act, and it's called a Brady disqualified person, is if they have some very specific things about the protective order. So it is a protective order that is issued after notice and an opportunity for hearing. So basically that due process was observed. So things like our magistrate's orders of emergency protection that happen, that are issued by a magistrate upon arrest, but before that person is released on bond or whatever, that magistrate, if they do a magistrate's order of emergency protection, there's no notice. I mean, they get like 10 seconds notice that, hey, I'm going to do this order on you because you've been arrested for a family violence incident. And I want to make sure that you're staying away from them, or issuing you an order to stay away from them. And they don't have an opportunity for a hearing. It's just like, this is what's happening as part of your case, which is one reason why it's temporary. It's very short, but it's definitely there and definitely enforceable by criminal by criminal means, criminal punishment. It had, the order also has to prohibit harassing, stalking, or threatening an intimate partner or the intimate partner's child. So basically, under the federal guidelines, that is a spouse, a former spouse, a spouse's or former spouse's child, or if you have a child together, even if you were never married, or if you lived or have lived with that person in the basically in the role of a spouse. So like common law marriage, something like that would count. The big gaping screaming hole in all this is it does not include dating, which is family violence under state law, but it would not necessarily qualify as a qualifying protective order in this situation if they've never lived together and they don't have a child together, or never were married. But it includes, so it has to be the notice and opportunity for a hearing. It has to prohibit this information involving intimate partner or their child, and
I'm
has
sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but we
that's
have
okay.
just shut it down.
That's okay. And contain either of the following. It can contain a finding that the respondent poses a credible threat or physical harm to protected persons, or a specific prohibition against the use, attempted use, or threat of physical force capable of inflicting bodily injury to the protected persons. And that's most protective orders. So at least most protective orders are going to have something along those lines. Otherwise, why would you have a protective order? But so that is what would make something a Brady disqualified person that cannot, under the law, have a firearm, at least under federal law. Now, state law has all different types of things where, it says, you can't have a firearm if you've been ordered not to have a firearm. That's the end. You can be prosecuted under state law. But for this particular thing, the reason this becomes important is because of this form that I talk about. It's the protective order data entry form, and it is a fillable form that we have in the system. And I will show you kind of here. Let me go. It looks like this. The very top of it looks like this, and it's a big, crazy form. And what I always wanted to try and get this in the hands of the folks who will help our survivors to apply for protective orders, because this is a form that needs to be dealt with and filled out really, really carefully. And let me back up to talk a little bit about that. Basically, to fill out the form, I always suggest that if you're helping someone who is applying for a protective order, that you are the one who is filling out the form with their assistance. You're asking them each question and getting it into the system, getting it onto the form, because if you hand it to the survivor, they may or may not understand what all this is. And there's a section in there that has different types of conditions, a bunch of which are normally in protective orders, but they kind of treat it like a grocery list. They just start checking stuff off. It's like, okay, that's not what this form does. What this form is supposed to reflect is what is actually ordered by the court. So what I always recommend is upfront, as early as possible, you fill out this form with them. You could get their input, have them do that with you. Every time you deal with them, confirm that that information is still correct, for sure. complete as much of it upfront as possible, because it's going to have things like the respondent's information. What is their name, where they live, you know, what scars, marks, and tattoos, what kind of car do they have, all that kind of stuff. But as much as possible at the time of issuance, being able to check that the conditions ordered by the judge are included on the form. So checking off the ones that were actually done as part of the order, including this Brady indicator, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a minute. But a best practice for attorneys that are doing this is to request and confirm with the judge. Like if you have that form and you've got that form in front of the judge at the time, and talking about, okay, we have all our paperwork, including this protective order registry, the protective order data entry form, that the Brady indicator is completed before the hearing is over. And that is this particular section right here. This is under all of the stuff about the respondent. And then there's a big, like I said, a big list of conditions for that are in the order. But then this is a Brady record indicator. And what this does is, if those conditions that I talked about earlier, that it was like a hearing after notice, and a protective order issued after notice and a hearing, all those things that we talked about, intimate partner, what the prohibitions were, all that stuff. If it was issued, then it's under, and those are all of those conditions are there. It's respondent is disqualified from having a firearm. And I love this, or I hate this actually. The way it's worded, it's like the old song called "Yes, We Have No Bananas." It's called "Yes, You Can't Have a Gun." So it means that this person is disqualified from having a firearm. If this information is not circled, what will happen is the people over at the police department who are entering this information after they receive the order, if they don't have specifically that this is checked off one way or the other, they go ahead and they put unknown, and which doesn't help anybody. It does not help anybody. And so any extra information that you can make sure that the judge has to know that this is something that qualifies a person not to have a firearm, and they actually go ahead and circle it as part of the paperwork that goes, that helps a whole ton. About in 2015, the federal government, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, ran a report, and it was not just Texas. They ran it. They weren't picking on just us. It was every state. But the ones that we had open at that moment, the active protective orders at that moment in Texas, only about 10% of our protective orders that were in the system, in the NICS system, had a Brady disqualifier on them. And I guarantee you, not all of our protective orders qualify for a Brady disqualifier because of those things that I talked about. I guarantee you a hell of a lot more than 10% of them do. So it's definitely an important part of this. So this is just kind of one of the things to kind of keep an eye out for. If you're assisting, or if you're going to be assisting, it might be something to start looking into already, if you're already dealing with that stuff. I'm going to take a really quick break here and see, are there any questions on that? I know I kind of went through it really quickly, and I'm certainly happy to answer whatever questions you may have before I embark on the second type of protective order reporting that we're doing. Any questions?
There's a question. It's not necessarily about this.
Okay.
I work for Lone Star Justice Alliance, serving juvenile offenders. Is there data on domestic violence victims in Texas who have children under 17?
I'm sure there is. I don't have any right here in front of me, but if you want to, my email is at the end of this thing. If you want to email me, I will see if I can track something like that down, or at least point you in the right direction and where to get it. One of the best places to go hunt that kind of stuff down is going to be DPS. They have a deal about crimes in Texas, and they do it for every year. And so there are some reporting things that go on in there that it is a good place to check as well. But if you want to email me, I'm happy to see if I can point you in the right direction.
That was me. Thank you. I just digging on data, and this is really helpful for us doing mitigation investigations. So I appreciate it.
Good, sure.
And just to make sure people are awake and alert, I've sent the shoe poll out, but we can go over that. You keep going, and we'll just talk about that.
We'll come back to it. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Monica's Law, this is the new protective order registry, and it's a little bit different. And in lots of ways than what we already are doing for TCIC. This was actually created after this young lady was killed by her boyfriend in Odessa in 2015. This photo was actually taken about 3 days before her ex-boyfriend found her and killed her. He later, he also killed himself. But she had fled and found a new home, new place to live for her and her young son. He was not the father of that child. But after she died, her family figured out that the information that came out was that that person actually had 2 prior protective orders involving 2 other ex-intimate partners. And so her dad, who is I believe he is a retired detective for Midland Police Department, got to talking to his Representative Landgraf, and they got to talking about, well, wouldn't it be great if there was something like a protective order registry? And I think what they had in mind initially was that we want to have people who are in potentially dangerous situations to be able to just get on and look up to see if someone has a protective order. Kind of like a sex offender registry. You know how the sex offender registry, you can run it by someone's name, you can run it by address to see if someone lives near that address, or go to your kid's school, that address, that's on the sex offender registry. And I think that's what they initially had in mind. However, myself and the majority that I can think of, domestic violence advocates across the state were like, that's a great idea and all. However, that puts our victims in even more danger in lots of ways. It certainly violates certain privacy rights that they should have. Granted, yes, technically protective order records can be, public, and that if you trot yourself down to the courthouse, can go ahead and see a request copies of that information if you can show why you need to have it, that kind of junk. However, that's different than sitting in your underwear in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning and just kind of trolling through and finding out information about people that really you have no business knowing. Because the people who would be trolling around in such a website would be the batterers themselves, their family members, their friends. We also know that victims of domestic violence certainly are prone to have problems with certain things, such as if someone knows you're a victim of domestic violence, sometimes people don't want to rent houses to you, or they're afraid to hire you because they don't want that kind of stuff brought to their doorstep. So it would not be too hard. My name is an example. Even though such a registry would have nothing at all in there about the people who applied for a protective order, the respondent's name would be in there. My last name is Piechowiak. Again, like I said, I live in Bexar County. We are a county of over 2 million people. And there's only 2 other Piechowiaks in all of actually South Texas. And they all live with me. It's my husband and the boy. And so it would not be too hard to figure out that if there was a protective order against a Piechowiak, one of those other 2 people, good chance, are the people that are the ones who filed that. And so that becomes a really, really a huge, scary issue. And we certainly don't want another reason for victims to be afraid to apply for protective order or seek help. Okay, should I let y'all know who the winner is on the poll? Anybody want to know? Are we done polling?
Sure.
Okay, cool. And the winner is dun 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 flip-flops. Flip-flops, sparkly flip-flops, people. Sparkly flip-flops. Last week it was tennis shoes and potentially house shoes part of the time. No, I'm done.
I knew it.
Yeah, I'm done with heels and dress shoes for right now. Especially doing this kind of stuff. You're just I've gone on pants that aren't pajamas, but they're pretty just almost as stretchy as my pajama pants. So there's that too. More than you ever wanted to know. But anyway. So for that reason, that's kind of how this registry kind of morphed into something a little bit different. We were supposed to start in June, and then thank you, COVID. And also we had a ransomware attack that was really very much affected a lot of the Texas judiciary, including OCA. And so everything was we were supposed to get kind of off the ground June. I was supposed to be training clerks and training all the users and getting everybody access and getting started. So then by September 1, they could be entering protective orders into the system. Well, so did not happen that way, but we were up and running by September 1. It was going, and we were training, and we had select pilot clerks and courts kind of onboarding them kind of gradually. And by October 15th, mandatory entry of all applications and protective orders began. Right now, we have about 15,000 records in there that have been entered into the system since September 1, the great majority of those since October 15th. So what we've been doing since then, and all of this is right now is the feature that is going on, which is public access for final orders only, and only if that applicant specifically requests that type of access. I'm going to talk about what that looks like here in just a second. There was a form, and I gave y'all a copy of the form. There's a form they need to fill out, and what happens is they give it to their court clerks. The court clerk then uploads it into the registry. Then we get notified and we deal with it. And then granting access and providing training on system use to restricted users. Restricted users are law enforcement and prosecutors. That has been kind of up and ready to go for about a month, but we were needing to get the word out there are 80,000 cops in this state alone, and probably close to 20,000 prosecutor types. So trying to get all of that word out to everybody and our lists and all that good stuff together. It's not like it's not as easy as, okay, like all the lawyers in Texas, because that's great, but we have a whole lot of people that we got a ton of lawyers, but we don't know specifically who is a prosecutor, who is not. There's not officially a state thing that says that. So trying to get all that information. So anyway, I sent like almost 4,000 emails over the weekend to those folks, letting them know that they have potential access to get into the system and look this stuff up. And now I'm working on training for them, doing training for an awareness information for advocacy groups like you guys as well. And then we're also going to be updating the information in the Supreme Court Protective Order Kit. Of course, anybody who knows me knows I always have to talk about the independent spirit of Texas. Again, born and raised here, so of course I love everything about Texas, but the very independent way about how the Texas judiciary handles things became a huge issue trying to work on this crazy registry, because we are so decentralized. We have 254 counties. We have over 3,100 judges, which means we have over 3,100 different ways potentially that paperwork is handled, stuff is routed. Every county does stuff differently. Some counties, all the permanent protective orders are handled in district court. Some counties it's the county court. Some counties it's both. Magistration is handled differently. It just all depends. So it makes it a little crazy to figure out the best way to do this so that it makes sense for all of the people involved. We generally run around 27,000 protective orders. That's magistrate orders of emergency protection and final protective orders. That number does not include texpos, so you can probably add easily another 9,000 to that number as well. Acronyms and definitions, this is easy peasy. This is part of the training that I do for all the courts and the clerks and stuff. Just when I'm talking about MOAPs, I'm talking about magistrates orders of emergency protection, protective orders. And again, this is all about protective orders, not restraining orders. And then texpos. Authorized users are basically the clerks who are doing the data entry. Restricted users are the cops and the prosecutors who have access to see more information than the public sees, but they don't get to go in there and do any data entry at all. Does not list judges at this time, and I don't know that it ever will. It is in the Texas Government Code under 72, Chapter 72, and it is for all protective orders, family violence, the protective orders and applications are the Family Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure. And we also make sure that it includes sexual assault, stalking, trafficking, indecent assault, and incidents involving bias and prejudice. So for magistrates' orders of emergency protection, everybody's got 24 hours to get it done. For MOABs, it's the people in the JP courts, municipal courts, or if they have a central magistrate process within that county, somebody in there is the one who's got to be the one entering it within 24 hours. It's not next business day. It's 24 hours after, within 24 hours after issuance. And the same for regular applications. That happens by county and district courts usually. So important differences between TCIC and the Protective Order Registry. And I get this question a lot. They're like, why are we doing this? Because we already have TCIC. Okay, well, there are some definite differences in how that is handled. TCIC is accessed by law enforcement only. There's also limited information. What happens is law enforcement officers are their dispatch departments are the ones who are entering the information into the registry, into TCIC. And so they are limited by character limits. And there are some fields that are limited like 500 characters. Well, if you're trying to get in all of the conditions of a protective order into that field, you may not be able to get it all in there. And there's really no way to fix that or change that. That's a DPS issue. We've been telling them it would be really great if you can adjust that. It hasn't happened yet. But the other thing is there's also no image of the order itself. All they get is a hit, which is basically a very cryptic looking little printout. It has like the names of the folks involved, maybe the addresses, a little bit about the conditions as much as they can fit in there. And that's about it. But this actual signed order you can't see that on that TCIC hit, which is why law enforcement generally needs to verify with the court that this is an order that is still a real order and all of that, because they can't necessarily arrest just on that information. But however, it does still feed into those national databases, those federal databases we talked about. So it's super important that it continues. And also data entry can legally occur up to 4 days after the order is issued. I've got MOAB here, but I meant protective order is issued, which means that it could be 4 days before it's going to show up for an officer, whereas on the registry they have 24 hours. So by the next day, and oftentimes quicker than that, depending on the court, they'll get it in there almost immediately, because the data entry is not that onerous to get that in there and get that system going. But the access for this is the courts, prosecution, and law enforcement. And the public gets some very extremely limited, which we will talk about. It does include the actual image of the order, and that can be used as a basis for arrest. But right now, it does not replace the use of TCIC at all. So the full faith and credit, again, kind of plays into this as well. Because under the family code in 88 and also under USC 2265, which is the full faith and credit provision that specifically talks about a protective order can be inscribed on a tangible medium, which is usually paper, or maybe stored in an electronic or other medium. And that would be this registry, because it's a PDF of the actual signed order, as long as it is retrievable in a perceivable form. Law enforcement does not have to, in fact, it is not required, doesn't have to have a certified copy that's in their hot little hands in order to arrest. All they need is that they can determine there's probable cause that it exists by relying on any relevant information. And this registry gives them that image that they can rely upon. So yes, 24 hours, even over the weekend, again, for safety reasons. Law enforcement can, contact someone and see that, hey, 6 hours ago you were released and here you are, and there is a protective order, and there you are, you're like within a block or two of a location you're not really supposed to be at. What are you doing out here? That kind of stuff. And so it definitely becomes an issue for they are be able to get in there and arrest. The best thing about it is they don't have to wait to get a warrant. It is a warrantless arrest according to Code of Criminal Procedure 1403. It is a warrantless arrest, and it does not have to be committed in their presence in order for them to arrest on that. And this is all for safety reasons, obviously. Expired orders do stay in the registry. TCIC currently moves expired orders into another part of of their database, so that if a law enforcement officer, when they run for a protective order, what's going to pop up is any active order. If they want to see any expired orders, they actually have to go a couple of extra steps to go hunt down any expired orders. And while they may not be able to arrest on an expired order, it's certainly for safety reasons for the officer and other people to understand that, okay, you're dealing with someone who a court has determined has not been safe. So for purposes of that, I think it's a really good thing. Also, a violent history is relevant to all arrest, detention, release, charging, and safety planning decisions. So it benefits the courts in sentencing decisions and also release decisions, bond decisions, that they see that there's been this history. For law enforcement, it is again available sooner than in TCIC. They can see the actual order, not just the TCIC hit. And then they can utilize it for good faith enforcement. If they can't pick up the phone and confirm with the court that, hey, is this really your order? They can use this because it is a copy of the actual order that was entered within 24 hours of its issuance. For investigation and prosecution, I will tell you this: I prosecuted family violence cases the majority of my 20 years as a prosecutor. I would have loved to have had information like this. When I would have a victim in my cases, would say things like, yes, I've had problems with this person for a long time, but also my understanding is that there was also a protective order against them by their ex, but I don't know where it was exactly. I think it was out in West Texas, but I don't know. Well, this is some way that we can actually check. Now, granted, for now, is anything, October 15th and on and newer, but within a year or two, we're going to be able to see a whole bunch of stuff and a history on folks that were not necessarily very, very readily available. And like I said, as a prosecutor, I would have loved that. It helps them for active and expired orders and also applications. Remember, this includes applications. So you can often see the affidavits that support the application. Orders involving any other applicants and contact information, witness contact information, maybe other folks that may be able to be able to help us track folks down, track down witnesses, track down our victim, all of that kind of stuff. Advocates, safety planning, huge for safety planning, history of abuse, absolutely important to be able to look at that when the safety planning, and also be able to make sure that everything is in there that needs to go in there. I do have a question. We are at 12:56. I'm assuming we're supposed to end at 1. Are we going to go a little longer since we started a little bit later?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
You just keep going. If anybody has to leave, they can type in their questions.
Yes.
People are working from home, but if you can't stay, that's fine. This if you have to leave, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and you'll get a link to that. So take your time, Kim. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I don't want to rush, but I also want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
giving you all the information. But you go on there and say, I'm done. Okay.
No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
I started hearing the Oscar music, playing. I'll know it's time to shut up. Okay.
No shepherd's hook coming for you.
Okay. All right. Good. I do want to give you even though this is not something that you're going to have access to, I want to be able to show you what law enforcement and prosecutors can actually see. So this is just a very quick little video that we're using as a tutorial for them when they're checking on things. So let me get started.
One more thing. So we're in this tab here. This is the managing. This other tab is basically what the restricted users are going to see. They're going to have a different website though, but for convenience, we don't want to make you guys go to a different website. So these here in this grid are just your court that you have authority over. You may have one court or multiple courts. This tab is all of Texas. So if you do need to double check something on a MOAP or something that might not be under your court, you can go in here and search. One thing I like about this search too is you can actually increase or expand your results here, your search criteria. So you can enter in the protected parties' names, search by, much more criteria here. So the view here, I'll pull up Joey here. This is what the law enforcement district county attorneys will see. They do not have any rights to edit. That will just be clerks and clerk staff, but they can view all the details. So this is why it's important to make sure you put your orders in here. And the system will not let you, if you enter that there's an ex parte, the system will not let you close without entering your document. Again, mine's redacted because it's just test information.
Yes, we were practicing on actual orders and we didn't want to put people's personal information in our test site.
So, Kim, did I miss anything here? Did
Nope.
you?
All right, so that's what they will see. And like I said, it's not redacted. We're encouraging people not to put redacted stuff in there because again, this is not for the public. Public will never see images of the orders at all. So searching as the public, this is what it's really important to kind of keep in mind. The public access is very limited, and it is not exactly what was initially envisioned for this, but we wanted to keep it safe. We wanted to make sure that if a survivor wanted their order, at least some information about their order, to be available to the public to see. I've had more than one that has found us online and contacted me and said, I have a permanent protective order and I want to warn other people about this person. But I'm searching on the public access and I don't see. So wherever they went and applied, maybe they didn't have all the information yet on how to get the public access. So we sent her the form and everything. And I let her know, it's like, here's the deal. You are welcome to fill out this form. We review it. We do all of that. But again, it's only if they specifically requested it and it's only for very specific things. So the public can search for permanent orders only. So after the ones that have had a hearing, notice in a hearing, so not magistrate's orders of emergency protection, not texpos. They can search by county of issuance, by the respondent's name, and or the year of the respondent's birth. Now, again, no public access for those MOAPs, texpos, or any images at all of any applications or orders, even of the final orders. So again, if someone wants to go and eyeball the actual order, you got to trot yourself down over to the clerk's office and see if you can get a copy of that order. Publicly accessible information is the issuing court, the case number, the respondent's information, the full name, their county of residence, the birth year, and race or ethnicity. Again, this is all prescribed by statute. The date it was issued, the date it was served, the date the order was vacated, if it was vacated, and the date of expiration. And again, only with a written express consent by the protected party. So even if it's expired, it's still there. It'll show that it's expired. If it's active, it'll show there's a little thing that shows it's active. So this is kind of a screenshot of what that looks like, but this is the actual website address, topicstxcourts.gov. Someone who wants to check would be able to click right here. A couple of things I did want to bring up when we were doing this. I wanted to make sure that it was a safe thing. I envisioned this as a situation where someone maybe is nervous about their partner and they want to check. We did not want it to be where, hey, you're looking at protective orders. And so we wanted to have an escape button. So we have an escape button. It's this little floating button right here. It's the X. We also have this banner when they first get here that says, this is how you can leave the site safely. You can do it by pressing the escape key, or can go ahead and press this button. And what this does is it dumps people out directly into, like, I think it's a news website, like Texas News, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know. But it looks pretty innocuous, nothing exciting, doesn't even look like a government even website. So it just dumps them out onto that. And for most browsers, it's hard to code it and program it for every browser, but just about most browsers, it's not even worth something where you can go and click the back button and go back to this. It says, nope, you're done. This is as far as you go. So we want people to be able to look at this and be able to get out as soon as possible. So once they read this, they can click this got it button and this yellow thing goes away. And so then once they click here, then this is what the search fields look like. It's first name, last name, birth year, county of issuance. We don't put dates of birth, full dates of birth on here. I mean, we do put them on here, but nothing on the public side will see, or addresses. You know, the county of where they live, that'll be there, but it won't be an actual address. And so they would go and they would search. The way this is done is as soon as you start typing, if there's something in the system, it will populate this little list that'll come down under here. When we first did it, as soon as I started doing, it will populate. I mean, it will populate. It was just, no, it had the list of the people, a list of all of the orders that we had that people had requested there to be public access. And I was like, oh, no, I don't like that. I want you to know at least something. So at least somebody's first name or last name. If what you put in any of these boxes, we don't have them with consent on the public side, it's not going to show up. Like most counties, I think we only have like 9 of these orders that are on the available on the public site. And so like Bear County, I think doesn't have one. So if you put Bear in here, nothing's going to pop up. If you put other counties in here, something might pop up. But if nothing pops up, that means there isn't one. And so then this is the little floating exit button thing over there again. And then once, let's say I put something in here and something pops up, and this is what it looks like. This is all the information. It's the cause number. It's what court it was in, their full name, the birth year that we have for them, the residence, race and ethnicity, the order, the date the order was issued, the date that it was mailed or provided to the person, to the respondent. If it was a default order, it's going to be the time when the clerk sent it out to that person. It's not necessarily the date that they got it in their hot little hands, but it is definitely the date that it was sent out by the clerk. If the order was vacated, what that looks like over here. Oh, what happened here? I lost my, there we go. If it was vacated, and the date that it expires and that it's active. If it's inactive, it's expired or vacated, I believe this thing turns red and says whether it's vacated or expired. And the screenshot doesn't include it, but it also still has the little blue exit button over here, but it got cut off. Sorry about that. Anyway, so that's what that looks like. So tips for practitioners and applicants is, again, there's no public access, but only upon a final order, the protected party can request it. And they do that by completing the form. And that's one of the forms that I sent you. It's called consent to publish or remove information. So basically it's the same form. Let's say I want to request that it is published. And so it's going to be on the public site. Let's say 2 or 3 months into it, I'm getting harassment or I'm getting and I decide, you know what, I do not want this on the public side anymore. They use the same kind of form to remove that information. And when you look at the form, you'll see kind of where it says all of that. It gets submitted to the form to the clerk's office for the court that issued the order. So if it's like district court in Travis County, it would go to the district clerk's office, and then they would be the ones that upload it into our system. And then we get a notice on that I myself and my person from OCA Legal Support, one of us is going to see it and going to let us know that, hey, there's something there. And so we look at it. What we wind up doing is we review the whole record. We review whatever is in there. If there's an application with that, if there's a Texpo, if there's a MOAP, whatever it is, because what we try to do is see is like, okay, how much do we have on this record? We review every single one of them and do what we can to try to make sure that the person who's requesting this is the same person who is the one who is the applicant. And granted, I'm not a handwriting expert, but we do our best. So we do what we can, and we have 3 days to grant that within 3 days, 3 business days. I can't think of a reason why we wouldn't. If anything, what we would wind up doing is reaching out and contacting both either the clerk's office if we have questions, or that applicant themselves and saying, hey, this is you, right? This is who, you are the one that is requesting this. If there's any kind of weirdness, that's what we try to do. And again, the same for us to request removal from the public view. For more information, the actual statute, we have it listed on our website. And then other questions related to the registry, if you want to contact us at ocalegalsupport@txcourts.gov. That is the same place where we are fielding questions for technical assistance for all of our users, our restricted users, our authorized users. So the clerks, we get judges, we get the cops, the lawyers, all the prosecutors, all that stuff. But if you have a question, that is probably the best place to go, because if it is someone who needs more information in general or legal part of it or anything like that, policy aspects, whatever, then that person will forward that to me and I will probably be the one responding. But I do a whole lot of this that I'm doing right now. So emailing me directly or calling me directly, I'm happy to talk to you. Happy to do it. But sometimes you're not going to get an answer maybe as quickly as if you try and go through legal support. If you want to send to both of us to see, when it's a race to see who's going to respond quicker, that's awesome too. And this is how you can contact me. This is my number. It rings directly to my cell phone. And then this is also my email address. And I think that's all that I have right now. Do y'all have any questions, comments, concerns?
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question for her? Thank you so much. I've already let her know. Here we go. Will protective orders issued and applied for before October 2015 be available?
Probably not, because we can't, like I said, there's about 27,000 those a year. So we are not really able to backtrack what we have told, what we have told clerks, and what is definitely happening. Let's say there is something that there was an application that was done, and let's say, in August, and as we know, they wind up, having to reset and extend Texpo while we're waiting to try to get this person served to have a hearing. Let's say they finally get to have a hearing and it's going to happen next week or whatever. Then what we're having them do is at that point go in, enter in everything for that, because now we're going to have some action on that case. So you may wind up with a few things that are from before October of 2020, but not too terribly many of them. So we're just not really set up to be able to have it, and the clerks can't really backtrack to do that. I'd love for them to, but it's just not really in the cards and in the money to get all that done.
One more question. Do you foresee Texas ever enacting a uniform judicial system where all courts have uniformity, which includes mandatory court forms statewide?
No, I do not. I would love it. There are a fair amount of courts and not just the people like us who work in the courts, but the courts themselves, the judges, the clerks, all of those that would love to have some uniformity. And there's a little bit, but not much. And I do believe, don't quote me on it, I know last session there was talk of a bill that would talk about certain forms that needed to be absolutely mandatory and across the board. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point that does not get introduced again. But with everything right now on their plates, I don't know how much traction that's going to get right now, but I wouldn't be surprised. And if that's the case, then I will probably be the one involved with creation of those things. And I have a wish list. I'm telling you, I have a wish list. If you have a wish list, send me your wish list. Because I am always, look, anybody that's crazy enough to ask me, what would I like to have? Or what do I think most of the people who are users of the court system would like to have in this area? I let them know. So send me your wish list.
That person that sent the question said she worked in Washington State for 17 years and loved the uniformity. It was very productive.
It's fabulous. It is fabulous. I love it. And I love it because basically what they do is they say, hey, OCA, or it would be OCA, create these forms. Heck yeah, I can create forms all day long. And I am in the process of creating some courtesy forms that most courts are happy to have. Why reinvent the wheel if you don't want to? But yes, if you've worked in other court systems, that is an absolutely fabulous thing. But yeah, I just don't see Texas ever doing that. But
one more comment. Very interesting. If you have time, read the new article in Outside Magazine about extreme skier Dean Cummings. Fascinating but sad of his mental health breakdown and the interstate failure with the protective orders. So.
Yes. And there is a lot of that. Well, you know, Sutherland Springs, I mean, the big failure there by our military not taking care of what they need to take care of. And there's just a lot of those kinds of cases. And yes, anybody, you know, the more you can read up on those things, I would suggest you do so. What the really frightening thing is whenever you have stuff that comes across your news feed, or some of those emails, I mean, some of those emails, some of those websites that I gave y'all on that resource page, when you start looking at a lot of the really scary things that happen, you start finding out that the connection to domestic violence is huge, and the failure of people connecting those dots. And that's kind of what this registry is hoping to help fill in some of those gaps.
In case anybody joined late, this recording will be sent to you. It will also be uploaded to our YouTube page, and her presentation and forms will be uploaded to our speaker zone page of our CAPA website. She's got a very detailed list of family violence resources, the TCIC Protective Order data entry form, which is, I think, fillable, the complete form, and then the consent to publish or remove information from the registry public view. So you should all get that soon. If you don't get that, just let me know. I do have